Hello and welcome to the Publisherspeak series for Peer Review Week 2022. We're delighted to speak to industry professionals from across the publishing lifecycle about peer review with a focus on this year's theme, research integrity, creating and supporting trust in research. Please join me in welcoming Alexandra Howat, Head of Open Science at the Microbiology Society, where she oversees the Society's open science strategies. Alex spearheaded the Open Research Platform project to convert the Sound Science single-blind journal, Access Microbiology, into an open research platform to ensure a fully transparent peer review process. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Alex, you are in open research. You're pioneering a new way of doing publications in general. So I'm curious, what do you think about the traditional or current standards of peer review that are in practice?
Yeah, it's traditional. If you're going to sort of ask that question, i.e. author submits a paper to a journal and then it's blind, let's say, let's discuss traditional being single blind. I think that's the typically traditional one. And then it goes to peer review and then the final version of record is published. So actually, if that's the typical one, then I'd say, I think it's doing okay. I honestly think there's still, there are many publishers out there that still hold this model, and I think it's an absolutely applaudable model to have, assuming you have two really, really good, rigorous peer reviews, perhaps more if you can do that and they're independent. I think it still holds. But I think there is a lot of potential and a lot of things we can be doing to improve it. And we'll discuss many of the issues that are currently going on in publishing. A lot of that's to do with, enhanced technologies. But yeah, I think it's okay, but we can be doing so much more as publishers. And lots of people are innovating with things. So yeah.
That's good to hear. So we're not doing so badly. I think there's always scope for improvement, and that's where you come in.
Yeah, hopefully, that's where we try.
So if I had to ask you, what do you think is the current state of research integrity or trust in research at the current moment? And what do you think are the factors that are contributing to where they are?
Yeah, I would have said, if you asked me the same question about 3-4 years ago, I would have said that public trust in research was pretty high. But, we've experienced in the last couple of years a complete change in the publication practices, but also because of the pandemic, there's been quite a few high profile papers. The Lancet, for example, recently had to retract quite a couple of papers because of falsified research. And it's always been happening, falsified research and malpractice and has always been occurring, but it's very often been behind closed doors. Publishers investigate, they might publish a retraction, and sometimes they don't. But because of the change in the last couple of years with pre-printing, sort of opening up the academic review process, things have come to light that really may not have done before. And because the public scrutiny is so much more on the pandemic and COVID research, there has been a massive amount of scrutiny on the research that's being published. And so there's just been more highlights and ability to critique and pick up this data. So perhaps in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last year, there has been a slight change in trust on academics as much as publishers. And that's a shame because I think 99.99% of academics really do their best to do rigorous ethical research. And it's just these few causing issues. But this is good. If that forces us to change behaviors and improve the way we behave and the way we publish work, then, that's also okay, I think.
Great. Alex, you're a big proponent of open research. Now, thinking as a publisher, but also thinking as an academic, who you were before you got into publishing, how do you think open research, open access, and transparent reporting are helping with this particular issue?
Yeah, I mean, just as I mentioned, the open access for one thing. So we know about Plan S and these drives to make everything more open access, which is fabulous. There's always issues with that, but that just at the very crux of it makes work more accessible by the public. So papers are not behind a paywall, and therefore anyone and everyone can read research. So primarily, that is absolutely fantastic. I'm of the firm opinion that no research really should be behind a paywall unless there are sort of real reasons that there's patenting and all that kind of thing. But really, this public funded research should not be paywalled. So yes, that is opening up for scrutiny and again, in trust in academia and papers. But preprints as well, we were bringing it right upstream. So we're making the work available at open access even earlier than the final version of record. And so that's really, really enhancing the rigor of the work as it goes through peer review. So again, people can read the process and see the process as it's happening. So I think there are lots of types of things, and then opening up the reviews themselves, lots of types of things that you can contribute to improve the or trust in research and the integrity of it as well. But also mandating further things from authors. So whilst as a publisher, we are really loath to say now provide X, Y, and Z, and jump all through these boxes, there are some things that we can ask of them that will improve the trust in the research. So credit, taxonomy, for example, justify what you did in this research and explicitly state it in the paper right at the beginning. So everyone can say, well, actually, all they did was they wrote the paper, or they did this particular part on the investigation of the paper, right? So really making authors think, what did I actually do to contribute to this work, and letting everyone see that. So, and that's some level of accountability, I think. So there's small things that we as publishers can do quite easily to get authors to be doing this, to promote integrity.
Brilliant. Alex, I think this is a great time to talk about Access Microbiology. You recently relaunched it as a open research journal. So I want to hear more about what your motivations were and how you went about it, and what's the early press on it.
Yeah. No, it was the original idea behind it. So we got a Wellcome funded grant in 2019, oh sorry, 2020 it was. And the idea, the real premise behind it was to show that we, as a small society publisher, can become innovative in the way that we publish, and we can open up research but by doing it, by not adopting huge established already functioning open research platforms. So we want to say that with our current technologies we've already got, we can stitch them together and actually create this new platform that really provides an additional service to our authors. So currently we have, or at the time we had 6 journals. They were all single blind, and they very much, in terms of the peer review process and the publication process, were very, very similar. And we really thought, we can go further than this. We can give people the opportunity to publish their sound science research. So it's really, really focusing on null, negative, replication, but also outreach, pedagogy type research, and saying if it's significant and it's sound, particularly on the sound emphasis, then it should be published. And so we allowed that as part of the scope of the platform. But then we said, well, if we're going to be doing this and we're trying to improve research and trust in research, then let's open it all up. And so the idea is to really turn the whole process inside out and say, your article goes online publicly, your peer reviews go online publicly, the decision, and also the final version of records. So the whole story gets put online for people to be able to critique and have a look at. So again, yeah, really pushing open publishing pretty much to the most extreme we could go at this point, at least.
Oh, brilliant. I'm sure your authors love it. What is their early take on what's happened?
We've had, so we've actually just had the first paper accepted today. So, I mean, hopefully we're going to get that published in the next couple of weeks. But so we're waiting on the stories from the authors. I think we are not going to start really talking to them explicitly until we've had a few all the way through the process. We would love to shout about how amazing it is and what they think, but we don't want to jump the gun, I think, a little bit. What I could say, actually, I think very anecdotally, because I've been sort of looking after the platform of the last few months, is that the peer reviews have improved in quality. So that was one of the reasons that people argue about opening up peer review, is to improve the quality of peer reviews. And at least for now, I would say anecdotally it has done. So that alone, I think, is an impressive shift for us. And I think perhaps reviewers, the messaging for our reviewers when we're going through the peer review process, we've really improved we're setting expectations of the reviewers, what types of things we expect them to be addressing in the peer reviews. And we've really provided more structured review formats for them. And it really seems to be helping with that. So tentatively great, but TBC, I think, on that one.
That's awesome. In this particular process, I'm sure, you went through a big journey about getting to this particular point. Are there any lessons that you're willing to share right now with other publishers trying to attempt something similar?
Yeah, so actually writing up a paper at the moment to preprint and publish, but a little few things I would say right now is working with the community right from the beginning is really important. So when we got the funding to do this project, we did do a little bit of consultation, but we really went then back to the community and said, okay, this is our idea, this is what we want to do, but what does it actually mean to you? Is this going to be good for you? We propose the model and make sure that what we're proposing really does actually fit them and works with them and that they understand it. Because I realized that over a few months, and I would say the first 6 months of the project, the language we used could be really different to what authors used and understood. So if we weren't really clear about what we were meaning when we were doing this platform, it could quickly spiral into something that wasn't actually what they needed and what would be beneficial to the wider society. So for me, community research and engagement, absolutely right at the beginning, and then all the way through the process. So we created a story over the last 2 years. We've been really doing a campaign of blogs and videos to sort of say, this is what we're doing, and this is what it means, to kind of keep them along and going along the story. In terms of the technology, so it's been a big amount of work, and no surprises, when you're using 3 different technologies, so our peer review, our sort of production, and then our platform itself, if you're stitching together technologies that weren't traditionally designed for that, then of course it's going to come up with some bumps along the road. So working really closely with your vendors, and having a really sort of almost informal relationship with them to be able to go back and forwards really frequently and break down those barriers and really figure out what the problems are, I think is particularly important. And get ahead of the problems before they become bigger issues, and be open to problems. That's absolutely fine. It's going to happen, and they're still happening. Even after launch, we're still finding things, but because you can't account for everything, so they're probably the 2 big takeaways for me.
That's amazing, Alex. I think kudos to you and the society for attempting this, and early results are quite great. So I'm hoping this continues. One question I have, and I'm sure a lot of publishers are thinking about this, is there any apprehension about submissions dropping or requests for VOR being lesser than usual? Are there any concerns around that, or those issues?
Yeah, we were quite nervous when we launched because it's such a different model. We were nervous that our community weren't ready for it. It was much effort we put into communication, and we did some campaigns to our previously published authors. You really can't know until it actually goes live, right? And we haven't seen a drop in submissions. We haven't seen an increase, but they've very much kept steady. And so we're hoping that now that we've got the first few papers coming out, and we've got in the next few months, we'll have published versions of records out, that people can really see the benefits of it all the way to the end of the process. So we're hoping there'll be an uptick in submissions as it goes on. But generally, we've had some just great feedback, at least from the editorial office side, the interactions with authors. So that, yeah, submissions was a concern. In terms of the version of record, I don't think we had a particular concern about that. For us, it was, we could only see this improving the paper. We really didn't see a particular negative impact of having this. We haven't had any negative feedback from the community when we were doing our research about having peer review content in the published paper. That didn't seem to be something that was a concern. So for us, including the peer review information and opening it up, really, I think will improve the version of record as well.
That's awesome. That's really nice to hear that. Alex, moving back to our question earlier about research integrity, what do you think are some of the metrics that we can use to evaluate integrity or trust in this particular process? And what can we do to foster trust? Is there a metric that we can use to further and make it better?
It's a really, really hard question because, integrity in of itself is intangible. I mean, so the Open Research Platform, as part of the model, we've adopted a couple of manuscript review tools, is what we're calling them, to form a proxy almost of integrity and rigor. So one is perhaps more integrity. So Authenticate, we've adopted on the Open Research Platform. So I know many journals actually use that as a form of screening and checking plagiarism, but we've gone a little bit further. And we've said, we're going to use this screening, and the results of that we post online. So everyone can see, perhaps if you're going to call it integrity, and whether you've plagiarized or lifted pieces of text from other people's work, then they can see that. And that's public. And on top of that, we've also introduced SciScore. So that actually looks at the rigor and reproducibility of the work. So it's less integrity, but it's more rigor of work, which really at the end does cause major issues in the work, as I've mentioned. And again, we're running that through the papers through that tool. Authors get to improve their work, and again, the report goes live online, so everyone can see it. And both the Authenticate and the SciScore results get DOIs assigned to them. So not only are we putting them live, we actually mean that people can cite these things, people can independently use them and sort of check the results of these papers. So that for us is, whatever we're doing internally pretty much is going out into the public to say that we're not afraid of showing these results. Authors shouldn't be afraid of showing these results. And for us, there are two ways to improve integrity of the platform. And we're going to be looking at other tools as and when they get either integrated into our peer review system that we're using, or other tools that we can kind of include in the workflow. We're going to keep on thinking about that.
That's great. Around this question, I think there's also a need to improve research culture as a whole, starting with early career researchers. And I know Access Microbiology had early career researchers as part of the whole review process. So can you tell us more about your experience working with early career researchers and how they could help?
Yeah, I mean, early career researchers really are the beginning of research full stop for me. And they're absolutely fantastic to work with because they're incredibly open-minded. They're at the beginning of the research process for themselves. They're learning everything. They're really engaged and want to know more about the process. So for me, that actually goes hand in hand with being able to change the system with them. I've worked more with sort of more established academics who've perhaps been doing peer review for, let's say, 20 years. It's quite hard to change their minds, on some traditional practices. So getting the early career researchers on board is really fantastic way of changing your peer review process. So as you say, we adopted this new model with Access Microbiology whereby we have editor mentors and editor mentees. And the mentors are, as I say, established academics, but they are very pro-open science, otherwise they wouldn't have sort of come onto the Access Microbiology board. But with them, we've got mentees. They're really, really early career researchers. They do have PhDs, but they're right at the beginning of the career progress, and we pair them together. And it's really to encourage the discussion between those two during the peer review process. So there's an ongoing discussion about the papers, and they can open up discussions with other mentors. And it's building a relationship between those two to make sure that they're doing appropriate peer review. And they then get promoted. So after a certain period of time, we look at the editor and say they've really been doing some great peer review, and we trust their ability to assess these works. So they become promoted to editor. So they're getting almost effectively a career boost in the board through a promotion in that sense. And then they could become a mentor eventually at some point, perhaps. But we've had our editor-in-chief as a prime example. She was a mentee, and then she went to mentor, and now she's editor-in-chief because she's really proven herself all the way through the process and been a fantastic advocate of open research. So getting them on board as part of the board specifically, but also as peer reviewers. So we've got a reviewer mentee system as well. We've got that on microbiology as well, but it's a very similar process. So getting someone, your supervisor or someone that's done this a lot, reviewed a lot, and submitting a review together and acknowledging that they've discussed that with their mentor, essentially their review mentor. So we're doing it at all angles, essentially. We're trying to make sure that ECRs get a chance to have a say as a board member, as a reviewer, and the development of the journal itself. Because otherwise, by the time you've got a journal that's established, and it's 10, 15 years old, and you didn't include the ECRs right from the beginning, you're going to have a fairly stagnant journal platform, I think, and you need to make sure that you educate and bring them along with you. Yeah.
I think education is the key, and you guys are doing a great job with that. Getting them involved early in the process brings in the right mindset towards this whole process, and I think that they will also become advocates of this in their own institutions as well. It's a lot to benefit. Alex, I have to congratulate you of being at the cutting edge of introducing new journal workflows and changing what people thought was possible. Now, but if I had to ask you to kind of think further 10 years down the line, how do you see peer review evolving in that period, in that time period?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's what all publishers are trying to think about at the moment. How can we stay relevant? How can we go further and be innovative? I think there's some really great work being done across multiple different publishers, particularly, and even breaking down journals in of themselves. I wouldn't say that we are going to be removing any of our journals in the next 10 years, but there are some. Octopus, for example, the platform that was launched, I think it's just at the end of last year or this year, is looking at just peer reviewing the modular parts of research, not a standalone paper. So can publishers start thinking about that in a more critical way? Don't look at just final versions of record, bring it upstream. Really start trying to break down the research workflow, essentially, and provide more support to authors to actually improve their work during the peer review process, whether that's of a hypothesis or a published paper. So I think, and connecting up tools and systems, I think, is really one of the things I think that need to be driving. As we've picked up the SciScore and Authenticate, there is no reason to keep using additional tools, and as long as they're not authors are on board and they're relevant to your research. Obviously, there's always got a bit of evidence-based reason of why you're taking on these tools. You can't just take them on to sort of join the publishers around you. But as long as these tools really support the change in the research process and support the authors, that's, I think, for me, one of the big things to be looking at. So yeah, again, that's something we're going to be really looking at going forward. But breaking down the journal, that's it's a big thing, and I think that's going to be where things are moving in the next perhaps 15 years, if we're going a bit further than that.
Hey, that's a great takeaway. And if 10 years from now, read that as the headline, you know where you heard it first. Thank you so much, Alex. Fascinating as always talking to you. I learned so much, and I wish you the very best for the journal and for yourself as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Freddie.